How much should an electrician be charging in 2025? How much do Artisan Electrics charge in 2025? £30 an hour, £60 an hour, or over £100 an hour? This is a question that I get asked all the time. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how much an electrician should be charging in 2025, and the answer might surprise you. Now, how much are electricians currently charging? Well, the only way to know is to get some data, right? So we did a poll across all of our social media, and in just 24 hours we had 55 responses, which contained some interesting insights. The average day rate came out at approximately £277, with prices ranging from £12.50 all the way up to £650 a day. But the most common cluster was around the £300 to £360 a day mark. Now, the average hourly rate came out at approximately £56, but prices typically range from between £35 to £75 an hour. There were a few low extremes though, with one person saying they charged 25 pence per hour. Now, we asked people if they were planning to raise their prices this year, and 38% said yes. 51% said no, and the rest said that they weren't sure. Well, hopefully after this video, you'll have made up your mind. Now, the survey was quite a varied representation of across the country. And let's face it, prices are going to vary from area to area, particularly where property prices vary. For example, in London, where property prices are higher and the cost of living is higher, naturally electricians are going to charge more, or at least they should. Now, we also asked people where they get most of their work from, and the overwhelming majority of people said word of mouth, with many also mentioning online, social media, Google, etc. as a source of leads. Other people included local papers, directories, check a trade, leaflets, and some people said they simply do no advertising at all. Now, if anyone's charging £35 an hour, I have to question their life decisions or the way they're running their business. Because in my mind, it's just not sustainable to be able to earn a decent living with all of the overheads that you need to cover if you're running a successful electrical business, and make a profit to be able to grow your business in the future. So what I'm going to do now is break down with you how to calculate an hourly rate that will allow you to build a business with profit in mind. Because if you're not building a business with profit in mind, you're basically running a charity, right? What is a charity? It's a not-for-profit organization. So you're essentially giving yourself a job rather than giving yourself a business. It's so easy for tradespeople to fall into this trap where they get on this hamster wheel of not charging enough and only barely scraping by every single month, just about being able to cover their costs and never making a profit and never being able to grow. So in this section of the video, I'm going to break down the way that you should price your work in order to make a profit and to thrive, not just survive. And we'll talk about how that affects your customers, because that's an important factor to think about too. Now, first things first, there are, of course, many ways to skin a cat. I'm going to simplify this process into quite a basic version, but obviously it can become more complex and there can be more things to factor in. But ultimately the goal is to break down your costs into two areas: direct costs and overheads or indirect costs. Now, what are your direct costs? Well, they're basically the labor and the materials, right? How much does it cost you for the labor, which could be how much do you need to get paid at the end of every month? That would be your cost to basically cover your wage, or it could be the wage of your electricians if you've got multiple people working for you. So that is the direct cost involved in doing the job. Now, we're not talking about overheads here, admin staff, any of the other things. We'll talk about that next. Direct costs is your direct labor to get the job done, and the direct cost of your materials. So that's the first thing that you need to calculate for each job, and that can be on a per hour basis or a per day basis. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to talk about things on an hourly rate because it's just easier. Now, the next thing that you need to know is your indirect costs. What are they? Well, you might have heard these called overheads, and it's simply all of the other costs that are involved in running your business, and those costs don't tend to change whether you're doing a job or not. So imagine you have a day off at home, maybe your van breaks down or something like that. You've still got to pay all of those overheads, even if the job isn't getting done. So it could be things like your insurance costs, your van, your tools, your accountant, your marketing, your bank charges and interest. It could be paying an admin person or other members of your office staff who run the day-to-day office and back-end side of the business. It's your telephone system, it's your uniforms, it's any training that you do every year. All of those myriad of things that you have to pay for either annually or monthly or sometimes even daily in order to just keep the doors open at your business. Now, do you know how much those costs are for your business? Well, many business owners don't, and this is a mistake that I've made in the past. It's so easy to fly by the seat of your pants and just think that your bank balance is an indication of whether your business is doing well or not. But the fact is, you need to know your costs in order to know how much you should charge to get the wage that you deserve and to make a profit so that you can grow your business and secure the future of your business. So I've made a very simple spreadsheet which I've shared with our Electricians Business School community. It's a great, fun, safe place to talk about business, to share your challenges and share your wins and learn from other people. So there'll be a link below if you want to join up for that community. On screen now, you'll see a copy of that spreadsheet and what it looks like. And I'm sure there's a load of mistakes here. Like I said, this is a very simplified version, but it just gives you an idea of what you need to be looking at. Once you know your annual overhead, that is all of the costs that it takes to run your business for 1 year, you need to then find out what the overhead cost is per hour. And in order to do that, you've got to calculate the number of working hours that are available in a year, i.e. how many hours can you bill to customers each year. To break that down very simply, there are 52 weeks in a year, there are 5 days in each week. That gives you 260 working days each week. And if you take a working day to be 8 hours, for one person that gives you 2,080 working hours that you can potentially bill out to customers each year. But the fact is that you're never going to be able to bill out every single one of those 2,080 hours in a year. Why? Well, hopefully you're going to allow some time to go on holiday. You're not just going to work 5 days a week every single week for 52 weeks of the year. But there are also other things that we would call downtime. Times when you're in between jobs, when you're doing things that you're not directly getting paid for. It could be those trips to the wholesalers to pick up materials. It could be the time you spend going out doing site visits and quotes. It could be the time in between smaller jobs where you're traveling and you're not getting paid. So realistically, you might do a day with 4 small jobs, each an hour long, and the time in between you're not getting paid for, which means in an 8-hour day doing 4 jobs like that, you've got 50% downtime. There's other things as well, like cleaning your van, getting it serviced. All of these things where you're not able to work, they all count towards downtime. If you look at an entire year and roughly calculate your downtime, you might find it's as high as 40%, which means that only 60% of those 2,080 hours can actually be billed out and you can actually get paid for. That leaves us with only 1,248 working hours in a year that we're actually going to get paid for. Now that number is important because then what we're going to do is take our annual overhead figure and we're going to divide it by 1,248 hours. So in this example, we've got an annual overhead figure of £36,640 and 1,248 working hours in a year. Now this is a one-man band business basically, and you might find that some of your costs are more than that, some of your costs are less than that, but this is kind of a rough average. What does this mean? Well, it means that your overhead cost per hour just to run your business and keep the doors open without doing any work is £29.36 per hour. Add to that your take-home pay that you want to, well, take home before tax of say £30 an hour, gives you a total cost per hour every time you're on the tools doing a job of £59.36. So you need to be charging £59.36 just to break even as a business, pay all of your overheads, pay your wage without making any profit as a business. Now, I would suggest that every business needs to allow for profit. And the reason for that is if you're not making profit, if anything goes wrong, there is no wiggle room. All businesses should have a bit of a buffer because let's face it, there are going to be times when unexpected costs come up. Things come out of the blue that you wouldn't expect, and unless you've got some money set aside to cover those things, you're going to be in big trouble. So it's good to work towards having 6 months of running costs saved up in the bank as a bit of a war chest, a security to protect you in times where work goes quiet or where unexpected costs come up. That can also be helpful because it gives you a fund that you can use to reinvest into your business, to grow, for example, and hire another person, buy another van, all of those things that are going to increase costs in order to grow your business. Now, obviously, when you grow your business, the overheads themselves don't tend to double when you take on a second electrician. They might increase by 10% or 20%, but the more electricians you have, the lower your average cost per hour will become. So there are what we call economies of scale that work quite well with these kind of businesses. But it's a whole nother ball game running a team with multiple people and having to keep them all busy. So there can be quite a lot of risk and stress involved with that, as I know well. So in order to cover all of your costs and make a 20% profit margin, in this example, you need to be charging £71.23 an hour. All of that is just so that you can end up with £30 an hour before tax in your pocket and run a business where you work full time in inverted commas. Can you believe it? Is that more than you were expecting or less? I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments below. A lot of people take this stuff for granted, and it's really, really scary when things go wrong. So it's so important to know your numbers and to be able to reverse engineer your business so that you're guaranteed to make a profit. But that takes forethought and planning and knowing your numbers, as we've seen from this illustration. Now, we haven't mentioned materials yet, and that's an important thing to factor in. Some people just charge materials at cost price, but that doesn't help to cover some of your overheads. Think of all the time that you spend going to collect materials, all the time that you spend on the phone with the wholesaler, all the time that you spend building out your quotes, doing site visits, etc. If you add a markup onto your materials, then that can help to cover a lot of those costs and some of that downtime that happens in the evenings and weekends outside of what you would call your normal working hours. And at Artisan, we have wrestled with this for a little while and we've come up with a great solution. We've managed to find a system whereby we can do a lot of our quotes without having to go and do a site visit now. And that's because I've co-founded a company called OpenQuote. It's an amazing software platform that I've personally helped build, and it has been a lifesaver for me because I found that I was going out doing site visits, spending tons of time and energy quoting for jobs that I wasn't winning, and all of that stuff costs you money. OpenQuote gives you a tool that allows you to gather a full and accurate package of information from your customers, a bit like a virtual site survey tool, so that you can have a quick glance at the job and have quite quickly a rough idea of how much it's going to cost. Then you can bounce that off the customer, and if they're happy with it in principle, then you can go ahead and invest the time in doing a formal quotation for the customer, knowing that you're more likely to win the work. And if they're not interested, if they were just a tire kicker or whatever, you've not wasted a ton of time going out to site, measuring up, doing all of that hand holding for someone that was never going to buy your business in the first place. If you'd like to find out more about OpenQuote, you can actually get a free trial. I'd love for you to give me your thoughts. There's a link below where you can find out more. So now for the question that you've probably all been wondering, well, how much do Artisan Electrics charge in 2025? And I'm going to reveal that to you in this video. But first, there's a little bit of a story to be told here, because I started Artisan Electrics nearly 10 years ago in 2016. And back then, it was a whole different ballgame. I was a one-man band running a small business and growing it from zero. So I believe the first hourly rate that I set up was £60 an hour, plus VAT. And I kept that hourly rate for a while until my costs started to increase and I started to take on more people. But back then, even as a one-man band, I still had quite a lot of overheads and I didn't really have a full grip on how to price my work. Then jump forward to the point where I start hiring people and the overheads then really start to get to another level. I first hired an admin person, then another electrician, then an apprentice. And with all of these things come other softwares, other systems that you need to put into place, more insurances, more vehicle costs, etc. And the overheads really start to ramp up. So at a certain point, I raised the prices to £80 an hour plus that, and we kept that as our price for quite a while. Then about a year and a half to 2 years ago, we raised our prices again to £93.75 plus VAT per hour. And then this year, we've raised our prices again to £100 plus VAT, a nice round number, which helps with my OC. So the question is, why do we charge that much? Because some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds horrendously expensive. Nobody around my area would ever pay that much for an electrician. And here's the thing, is that we've had to come to that pricing based on our business model, based on our costs, and all of the things that we need to provide in order to offer the 5-star level of customer service that we promise to our customers, along with high quality installation work, only sourcing the best materials, and ultimately being here for a long time to be able to look after those customers going forward. Because there's a big problem I've noticed in this industry, and that is when it comes to aftercare. There are many electricians who will rush in and do a great job for the customer, but when anything goes wrong in the future, because they've not priced the job properly, they'll be very hesitant to come back, because as soon as you have to go back to the job for whatever reason, suddenly that's all of the profit gone from the job. And this means that many customers struggle to ever get hold of the electrician again after they've done the install, even just to ask some questions or deal with a few minor issues. At Artisan, I've always wanted us to be here for the long haul, which means we need to make enough profit to actually be able to set aside time to go back and talk to customers in future if needed, to answer technical questions, to offer the level of customer service that people come to expect when they watch our YouTube videos and the kind of standard of work that we project. Now, we are in the process of growing as well. We are so busy at the moment that we're looking to take on new team members. So those overheads will change over time. As we take on more electricians, our overhead per hour will reduce. But as we take on more electricians, there's going to be more of a back office team needed to organise and steady the ship and make sure that everything flows and runs smoothly. So my job as a business owner is to be constantly reviewing our costs and projecting for the future. Because that overhead figure that you saw in my spreadsheet, that shouldn't be based on last year's overheads, but really that should be your projected overheads. The goal should always be to do a budget for the year ahead and allocate certain amounts to different things, based on historical figures, obviously, but based on your projected future growth as well and what you think you're going to need to spend in order to reach your goals as a business. So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration to pricing your work properly, and it's not easy. But one of the biggest worries that a lot of people have when they raise their prices is, will customers pay it or will I lose work? So let me talk about that for a moment. It's a common fear that if you raise your prices, customers are not going to be willing to pay that amount. But realistically, when you make a small price increase, regular customers are very unlikely to even notice. So that's the first point, is that it's probably more of a worry in your own mind than it is for customers. Especially if they're used to you, you've worked for them before, and they know you do a great job. They're going to understand that you're going to have to raise your prices from time to time in order to stay profitable and keep the business running successfully for the future. But there is another factor at play here. Now, you will lose some jobs because you are too expensive, in inverted commas. But should you take that personally if a customer says you're too expensive? Well, no. If they say you're too expensive, well, you're too expensive for them. For that customer, according to their budget, they think you're too expensive. But that does not mean you're not worth what you're charging. There's a huge difference between being too expensive in the mind of one person and actually ripping people off. If you're charging what you need to charge in order to run your business successfully and do a great job, there's nothing wrong with that. And customers who do have the budget for you and want the kind of service that you offer will be willing to pay for it. It's as simple as that. There is something that you've got to get to grips with, which can be a challenge. I've certainly wrestled with it in the past, which is to realize that you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone is your ideal customer, nor should they be. Because if every Tom, Dick and Harry was your target customer, you'd have to price yourself so low that you wouldn't even be able to take home a reasonable wage, let alone make a profit and grow your business. So you've got to price yourself to match with your target customer. And for many businesses, like my own, they've realized that the best way is to aim high, aim for the kind of customers who have the budget to afford to pay a reasonable rate for a really good service, because they value quality over price, and they realize the benefits that they will get of paying that bit extra to get a quality service with all of the aftercare and benefits that come with it. So now you know how much you should be charging, but what if a customer refuses to pay? Well, that happened to us recently and we made a video about it here, so why not settle in and watch that?